You're watching Capitol Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
Welcome back. This week, the Illinois State Police started a series of hearings designed to answer questions about the state's assault weapons ban and the registration component that officially ends on January 1st of next year. Gun owners have until then to register their qualified guns with the state through the state's void card system. Joining us now is Josh Witkowski with the Illinois Federation for Outdoor Resources. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Cole.
Your organization is one of several that have a lot of members that are very concerned about this law and have a whole lot of questions. And just to start here, what are some of those biggest questions that they have about this law?
So people who have been paying attention to the news media about it know about this law, but the way that it's covered is assault weapons, or so-called assault weapons. And people have a certain perception of that and what that is. And that perception usually falls along the lines of a modern sporting rifle, your ARs and whatnot, or those kind of rifles. Unfortunately, this law encompasses a great deal more firearms than that. And the issues that we have is that because of the vagueness in the law, the amount of firearms and firearms parts that it encompasses will greatly affect the Illinois outdoor community, and a lot of them are unaware of this fact.
When we're talking about the outdoor community, we're talking about hunting, recreation, all of those aspects.
Hunting, fishing, trappers, all that kind of stuff. A lot of them will carry a firearm with them, and a lot of those firearms may have to be registered, and they don't think about it. One particular firearm, the Remington 1100 series semi-automatic shotgun. This is a semi-automatic shotgun. It's been around for many decades. It doesn't look anything like what most people think of when you think of a so-called assault weapon. It has to be registered because it has a capacity of greater than 5 rounds.
So when we're talking about the registration process, is the question of whether or not a gun has to be registered, that's boiling down to, your typical Second Amendment questions, your arguments, I shouldn't even have to register my gun with this, or is there actually a confusion or a negative to registering a gun that isn't supposed to be registered in that case?
Well, there's always a negative when you come to a registration component. The governor of Connecticut has made very clear that the firearms that were registered in Connecticut, he is now interested in finding a way to seize them. So there's always a negative in a registration component. Our particular concern, though, is assisting the law-abiding firearm owners of Illinois do what they need to do to protect themselves legally. What we are concerned about is somebody who doesn't understand how wide-ranging this law is, having a firearm that was supposed to have been registered according to the law on January 2nd, getting a violation, either a misdemeanor, or if they have 2, it becomes an instant felony. They become accidental felons because of how overly vague and broad this law is. And unfortunately, the administrative rules that we're talking about really don't do a whole lot to clear up some of the confusion out there.
We are, I believe, just about a month into this registration process actually being launched by ISP, and then we have less than 2 months until that January 1st deadline.
Right.
I've heard numbers, the registration numbers so far haven't been great. A very low percentage of gun owners in the state have actually registered through the online void system.
Yes.
Do you foresee this being a problem, that we're going to have a lot of guns that weren't properly registered that needed to be on January 1st?
I foresee this being a huge problem in the state of Illinois. When the Illinois State Police are still discussing what needs to be registered and what doesn't, and we're in November already, and registration is supposed to occur by the end of the year, that's going to be a problem. You're going to have a lot of people are waiting to see on certain clarifications. There was news dropped today that something that very clearly is a detachable magazine under the guise of the law. Illinois State Police today said, no, it's not a detachable magazine with regards to a shotgun part. That's going to affect registration. Whether or not that same attachment is still considered an assault weapons attachment, because it could be attached to a semi-automatic shotgun, creating a so-called assault weapon, that still has yet to be answered. There was a lot of, we're not sure, we'll get back to you today in these hearings, and that was kind of unfortunate and frustrating.
The Illinois State Police weren't actually going to have these hearings leading up to this process. This was a result of a Joint Committee on Administrative Rules hearing last month, where lawmakers had plenty of questions for them as well. And they ended up passing through the administrative rules for ISP, but as a sort of compromise the state police decided to have these listening sessions. From that point, when you heard they were going to have these Q&A type hearings, to now when you actually see what today was like, it sounded like you were disappointed with the outcome today.
Disappointed, more like frustrated. One would hope, the law has been the law. It passed back on January 10th. One would hope there would have been better preparation for very specific technical comments, especially when these are the same issues that were being brought up in December and January on this law before it was passed, and they still don't have answers.
So going forward, for full disclosure, we're taping this on Thursday after the first hearing just took place here in Springfield.
Yep.
There's another one scheduled for Friday in Chicago, and then there's another one scheduled for Monday down in Southern Illinois in Caseyville. And just going forward, what kind of changes do you want to see? What kind of answers do you want to see from the state police?
We would absolutely love to see definitive answers in writing, posted publicly where it's easily accessible, but where it's also promoted to firearms owners. There's a lot of firearms owners that don't understand this entire thing is occurring online. You still have good sections of rural Illinois that don't have reliable internet or wireless access, and they're supposed to find out everything about this online. There's not a real good public education component going on out there right now. And unfortunately, it's going to cause a great deal of what I'm going to call accidental felons, well-meaning, law-abiding gun owners who have been following the law their entire lives, and then magically on January 1, because they've possessed a firearm, they become a felon.
What do you anticipate happening then, though? Because there's been a lot of talk about that and the violation of the law. Do you anticipate if the state doesn't know that somebody registered their guns, obviously they have the FOID card and systems like that. Are you worried that the state's going to go out after these gun owners, or
No,
is that?
In our particular instance, what we anticipate happening is an individual taking a shotgun out into the field to hunt with it, out onto public property, which they are permitted to do. And then a conservation officer or a state trooper makes contact with them, realizes the firearm falls under this very broad definition of assault weapon, and says, is that firearm registered? The hunter, being unaware that that had to be registered, will say no, and now it becomes a misdemeanor. If they have two firearms with them that meet this definition, it now becomes a felony. So that's what we anticipate happening, especially in the winter hunting seasons.
You talked about the lack of a public education campaign on this, and I wonder, have you felt like there's been too much of a burden on groups like yours or the State Rifle Association or all these different, advocacy groups to educate their members and to educate people about this law?
So I can tell you that our group, the Illinois Federation for Outdoor Resources, has been talking with the other advocacy groups in Illinois, Illinois State Rifle Association, Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois, Freedom Steel, a few of those other groups. And what we have found out is that between all of our organizations, we are dealing with hundreds of phone calls weekly. It's 50, 60 phone calls a day between our organizations on people asking if something has to be registered, doesn't have to be registered, asking technical questions that should have already been cleared up by now and unfortunately weren't.
All right, well, Josh Witkowski, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Cole.
We'll be right back.